places to kind of to visualize some of them.
Huh.
And so all of that is currently in our draft landscape design and unavailable to us.
Right.
And so then outside of that on this map, there's so many considerations to make, right? So these are our youngest stands generally, because the majority of the older stands have been moved into the habitat conservation areas. So these are, take what's outside and move it what's inside. And that's the least amount of staff work, but it has the biggest impact visually, kind of what people hold, you know, on the FMP side of things. So there can be some pushback there. But when you start going in and just picking and choosing which ones, then you have to bring in specialists, and it's a lot more staff time because you have to prioritize which ones make sense. And do we all agree this is the right set to move? The two options that we're looking for, so feedback there would be great. And then go ahead.
So from there'd be a couple of different arenas to have this conversation. You know, from a performance standpoint, you'd want to kind of qualify the habitat performance of these two decisions here, your wholesale. And how could you characterize that? And then there's the social, just the social journey that would take for folks who are have 1 foot in each paradigm, who are invested in the landscape map and beginning to be invested in HCA. It seems to me that is that where you guys are at?
A big part of this too is long-term. So we're talking about developing the forest management plan right now. It will not have these desired future conditions in place.
Correct.
And so what we're essentially saying is, while we do this, let's do this 1 year sooner. And so it's not a function of if we move these, they are being moved.
Right.
And so the habitat conservation areas are the areas long-term. These are not. And so the revisions are, do we move them a year earlier?
Right, and I'm talking about, can you qualify, you know, the habitat performance impact and moving them a year sooner? You're saying basically, it's basically zero impact, or basically, you know, there's some kind of debit on the habitat performance side.
Maybe not,
What is it?
because the HCA's are larger. The debit's gonna be on the volume side. You can't, you're gonna squeeze the neighborhoods. You can't get some free up in the hinterlands.
Yeah, if you don't, but I'm saying if you do, you know, are there tangible?
It's just the harvest that we do in them, because the rest of them will remain on the landscape. So it really is just the depletion of the actual harvests that are conducted in those areas.
Yeah, I mean, and I would just say from the industry side and the operations side, I mean, the negotiated deal from the environmental community, he said, we don't want that sooner. I would really be having a hard time understanding why, because I mean, we gave up a lot. I mean, we didn't really have a choice in the matter, quite frankly.
Sure.
And so,
Yeah.
I mean, if it helps free up operational flexibility now, I mean, I would rather be operating off of one plan versus two.
That makes sense. I was just really trying to explore, could I say with a straight face that there's no.
Those are
there's no-
the acres that were decided upon. I mean,
No,
that's
I
what
know.
the federal services want. So maybe go ask them.
Right,
about
but
that,
there's
you
no
know?
mandate about how soon. No, whether that transfers in advance of the permit of the final CP, that is the gray zone. You know, so I would say at the water cooler, that there would be no habitat costs to doing all this early. in 1 year.
I think to that, it's the conversation is. We're choosing to follow the habitat conservation plan. All of the rest of that you saw. And that's right now, it's in addition to, but it's to Amanda's comment, what we're proposing is essentially trying to move to just that. We're trying to move to the habitat conservation plan faster.
Yeah, that would be a better, I think that'd be a better frame. And
On balance,
Can I-
without having the metric, I think I would say though, that. You know, given the time frame we're talking about, and given the fact that. With the HCA's, you capture almost all. Of the older states. There's very few of them that are outside of HCA's. And we literally went down the list
yep, and that's-
of dealing with those, right? And so. I think you would have to take the HCP overlay off. And say, well, if not for the HCP, then what could be harvested? And so I think it would, you know, I without having numbers, I think you could still easily say that the benefit is on the. That there's less older stands that are gonna be harvested.
So just to give some context to that, you know, again, looking at the center of this, everything in this that isn't highlighted is what under our existing plan we could harvest. And so what we would be looking at is moving some of this into here, and that's to Mike's comment of you'd have to look at the existing plan to compare. The difficulty is that we're dealing with the two that are very different with different goals and so we're in this like transitional year where we're saying, do we do both and restrict ourselves both, which is more restrictive than even the HCP was having us do, or do we move to the one plan as soon as possible?
yeah.
Is really where we're.
For the record, I'm all for that. Sure, all for moving early. I'm just trying to anticipate the most difficult conversation I might encounter.
So Lisa, do you have any input on this? Are you following this conversation?
I am, but what is it that you'd like me to input on? I'm gonna have to be a little bit careful here.
I was wondering if you wanted to weigh in on this at all. Do you get the context? Basically, what ODF is saying is that they're thinking about, looking at the next, plan, relative to the HCP as it would exist, but
Mhm.
that means that some of that landscape is the older structured stuff, but it's outside the HCP. Anyway,
Yeah,
it's
so,
more efficient. It's, you know, it seems it gives them one little benefit for the year.
yeah. Yeah. ODF is walking such a fine line right now. I fully appreciate that. To the point made earlier, I'm sorry I didn't catch who it was, but that the person said you'd be surprised if the environmental community was upset about something more being done sooner.
Yes,
Did I hear
right.
that correctly? Yeah.
Yes, you do.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree with that. And if the agency department's acting with the intent of moving forward as though the HCP was in place, and make sure I'm tracking here correctly,
Right.
then from an environmental perspective, now in this case, just mine, and really actually probably even the department that I am also representing, I would say that I too would be hard pressed to think that this would be viewed with angst more. There's always angst from whatever side, but would be viewed as in compatible with their expectations, assuming they think the HCP is good. That, yeah, I don't know. There's a lot to be gained here from both sides at this point. But it is, I do not envy the line that the department has to walk at the moment. But it does feel like everyone's trying to be really cognizant and reflective of what we're trying to achieve through the HCP. And in spite of it not being yet approved. And so I think that that shows some good faith to folks as well. Am I tracking right, Lisa, in terms of what you were asking?
You are tracking or spot on. Yeah.
So,
And I'll just know, this is Amanda, I think that was me, Lisa, who said that.
okay, sorry.
But, and I'll just say that from the, you know, industry side, the logging side, I mean, we are on the record in our comments saying that we think it's inappropriate to be moving forward with the HCP without an approved, without even having a DEIS in place. We don't have a ROC, we don't have ITPs. And so, you know, my personal perspective, and I think many in the industry, is that we shouldn't be moving this direction. Now, I think it's better operationally than the current state of affairs in which we have two. So if that's a compromise, I mean, I'm willing to say that I would rather have that than the current situation in which we're in, because I think where we're at right now is even more difficult. Just to kind of lay it all out there.
Yeah. Thank you.
And maybe the only other thing I'd add is, and you know, this doesn't necessarily help an individual unless you want to use it, but I have been trying to socialize this for well over 2 years now with all of the environmental and conservation groups. You know, the fact that it's, if you're all in on the HCP, then this is only going to be another couple of years. Don't worry about DFC moves. It's not going to be relevant very soon. And also, yeah, you know, there's a few older stands that are left outside of HCA's, and unless there's some other reason we can't get to them, they're going to get cut. So that's a reality of the situation. These are the choices that are made. These are the trade-offs. So, you know, may not help in an individual conversation. I certainly.
No, but this conversation, it gives me some turns of phrase and some concepts for describing what's happening there.
And I think, and your point is well taken in that, you know, if we could have a granularity of data to be able to make individual acreage decisions about habitat, you know, usage and habitat benefit and all these things, I mean, we would be in a good place. But, you know, the HCP was developed with models, and, you know, we all know that no model is right. Yeah. So, and it's all based on the data that you have, and we know that we've got problems with our growth and yield, and there's all these other things, right? And so, this is what we have, right? And so whether or not those HCA's look the way that they should, I mean, I would argue there's a lot of land in there that, you know, really should be in general, and there's probably land outside of HCA's that should be in HCA's as well. That would be better served there, or is inoperable, and we can't do anyways. But, you know, this is the situation we find ourselves in. So it's, you know, if we could do it all and have all the right data and have really perfect LiDAR and habitat calls and really get to where we wanted to be. I mean, that would be like the creme de la creme, right?
I feel like I could retire then.
Yeah.
Okay. So I just have one other point that I wanted to talk through with this, and this is on the volume ranges. So this is another thing that has been a bit of it was a bit of an experiment just to see how it would work. We have volume ranges right now currently in the implementation plans for each of the districts, and we are just experiencing, there's a lot of questions that have come up. There's a lot of misunderstanding of like what it means, or different interpretations of what it means. But at the end of the day, they're also very challenging to hit right on with large sales that are still in the planning process, especially on some of the smaller districts. And we're losing some of the flexibility to take opportunities where markets may be up or maybe lower. We like salvage sales, that's playing into it. And so what we'd like to do is just to get that back down to a one number that we're targeting, and then it may be higher or lower, and then we would adjust as we work through these plans, kind of how we were in the original implementation plans prior to 2024. So that's something we're considering, and we'll be looking through with our model outcomes and how we could get that dialed in at a better for all of us, I think, as we have conversations about what those ranges were, and versus just having a target that we can explain why we're high and low.
I just, as a comment, I've always been blown away how close you all are to your volume numbers. So if you need more flexibility, I mean, I think you've done an amazing job with that. I don't know how you do it, but I know nothing.
The field's amazing, like they really do.
Okay, because
Yeah, they do a great
it's
job.
so spot on. I'm blown away.
Yeah, but the target ranges are definitely limiting our ability to make the choices that we need to make to be able to be reactive as much as we can be. We are already, because of our planning process, it's really hard for us to be reactive, but the target ranges are really confusing that. And then to be kind of hit from kind of all sides about those target ranges, it's just like, this is making it really complicated, and it doesn't have to be.
Yeah, the original plan of the target ranges was, they're not that big. They're relatively small target ranges, but as long as we fall inside of it, we're good. And then it was for a very short period of time, so we weren't too worried about it. But what we found after just a year of implementing it is, in the past, what we would do is we would, lay out our timber sales, and then if something came slightly over, slightly under, we would make an adjustment for the very next year, oftentimes less than a month apart. And then if the previous year came in 500,000 board feet lower, we'd increase for the next year 500,000 board feet of planned sales, so that we were constantly adjusting to keep as tight to that line as possible. And that actually gave us more flexibility over time, because we could make adjustments over each individual year to make sure that we are tracking right on. The ranges are just trickier because it's like, well, if you're in the middle of the range, does that mean you're lower and should make an adjustment over the next year or not? And then do you only make adjustments when you go outside the range? It's just been confusing for us to implement, and as strange as it is, it's actually easier to land on one number and then say, we'll just do adjustments each year to make sure that we're tracking within that kind of less than 1% variable.
I don't know if it's appropriate now for me to comment on that,
Of course.
So, I mean, we definitely have some concerns, I think, of how the interpretation is happening with the ranges, and what we're seeing with FY24 in particular, given direction from the state forester on actually increasing or finding opportunities to increase harvest above the primary sales that were already approved in the AOP, to try to help soften the socioeconomic blow with the transition into the HCP. And given the conversation that we just had, right, of, we're already constrained with the both plans, we're trying to look potentially for this opportunity to move the HCP forward sooner, while there's flexibility in that and benefits to that. I think it just lends even more credence to this point that the state forester has made of, let's try to, have more of a glide path, right, than a cliff. And so I guess I don't know if maybe that conversation needs to be elevated to the state forester at this point in getting more direction on what he meant in that letter, or kind of where that's at. Because I definitely think we need to get rid of the ranges with all of the confusion that they've caused. Now, what does that look like for a 2-year cycle again, right, with the 2026, 2027? IP, that'll be up for conversation too, I think, and how we think through just a one number, right? And what are the sort of top end, bottom end, I guess, maybe percentages or whatever we, I mean, I think that there's a discussion that maybe needs to be had there, but I mean, that's kind of where I am at, or that's my question to you guys is where are you at in sort of the interpretation from the state forester and directing to go above and beyond the primary and recognizing that the primary sales have not changed in their acreage. You're still doing what you said that you were going to do. They just cruised out higher because you actually cruised them. So, from an operations perspective, from a effects on the ground perspective, the effects are still exactly the same.
Yeah.
The volume just happens to be more.
So, and so we've had that debate a lot about acres versus volume. And so we're measured on our volume, and that's regardless of what acres they're on. And a lot of times we can be overly conservative in our volume numbers to account for we didn't know how the HCP buffers were going to lay out on the ground. And we didn't, there was constraints out there that we can be more conservative on in the planning process to ensure that we're hitting our targets as those areas kind of shrink due to the constraints during sale setup. So I'll talk a little bit about like how I interpret that and the direction that I've been given. And then we can, open that up for, if Mike wants to weigh in as well. So when Cal had asked us to work at a higher part of the range, the expectation originally when we set the ranges as the midpoint was where we would be targeting. And then the top end of the range was as we worked more in the HCAs for additional like work inside of the habitat conservation areas. And the low end of the range was like, we really don't want to drop below this point. So when we got that direction, we really targeted our sales to the top end of the range because we had the flexibility within that. So that kind of became the new goal. And we're still cruising some of the sales. They're finishing up right now, but each of the districts is within 1 million of the top end of their range. And actually 2 districts are over that because those ranges are so tight on some of the smaller districts. So overall, it looks like we're tracking well with that top end of that number. And basically the instructions that we've kind of gone back and forth on this, but where we ended up was that we would do as many, it's not being shared, sorry about that. I didn't realize I was not sharing. If we are, so as we do the primaries, we try to get as close to that top number or over that top number. So as close to that top number as we can with the sales that we have. And then if we're above, let's say your target range was 42 and the first 6 sales came out at 42.7, we wouldn't do another sale. We would just roll that over to the next sale plan, which is totally in alignment with where we've been in the past. Except for in the past, we've had flexibility to do that. We would just reduce the next year based on that. With the ranges, it was just how close could we get to that number? If we went over, that was fine, but we wouldn't add another primary to that sale. And that's how we've been interpreting.
And I guess just one other additional comment before others maybe jump in is that I don't represent mills. I represent loggers, and for loggers, acres equals jobs. So when we pull back sales, those are jobs that we're pulling back. We don't have the economy of scale to, we've been told that there's going to be so many sales and so many acres treated. We still think those acres should be treated. We're expecting those jobs. So from a sustainability and the certainty perspective on the operator side, that is how we view it. It's regardless of the volume outputs. Now, yeah, that might be more trucks. That's good for our members that drive truck, but I mean, the acres treated piece, I think, is really where we're focused. It's I understand the volume metrics and how you guys are how you guys are judged on that or are reporting on that, and I can be empathetic to not wanting to say that you're gonna do too much and trying to be conservative on those numbers, because you don't want somebody to, sue you because you didn't meet that high end level, but on the same end, you don't want somebody to come after you because you quote unquote, maybe the perspective is over harvested, right? But again, you guys aren't proposing to do anything different. The crews, there's just more volume than you thought was there.
And I absolutely hear the recommendation, and it is something that, as we talked about for planning purposes, for not just us, but for purchasers, mills, operators, being able to be cognizant of like how they look at the numbers versus how we look at the numbers. But historically in context, like when you do it over a longer period of time, the way that we have approached it, like the above and below, has always been on volume and not on acres. And so that's just what we continue. Not saying that's the right way to look at it, but that's just the practice that we've been instilled on that. But I think it's something to consider as we move forward. As we look at future AOPs, even FY26 and 27, and also into our implementation plans as we consider that and really think through like how conservative we are being on those numbers based on how we're planning those sales out and the impacts that we see out there. So that's an option for us to do as we go forward. But I do want to see if you want to have any follow-up.
Yeah, I mean, we are looking at that, are there things we can move up? And, I'm not holding a planning unit to some, you gotta hit this number. As a matter of fact, I think we should give ourselves a little more flexibility than we have perhaps in the past. But, the way the sales are put together is, well, say if you wanted to stay within close enough to your top end that you're not going to raise the ire of the folks that are going to come after you the other way. What you can add is not always very clear. We talked about it yesterday. How do you make that sale work from where we were standing? Well, you got other units out there that are clear cuts, right? And so thinking about the future sale that you're stealing from, it's like, is that going to pencil the same way? So there's logistical stuff in there that's not my forte. I know it exists, but it's not there. But actually, I hear exactly what you're saying there with acres, and I think one of the reasons things have always gone back to volume for us is, also volume doesn't necessarily equal value. There's market forces, but volume's closer to value than acres are, and that's how we get paid. And so that's just, I think, the reason that we're in that long-standing volume. And because for a public land manager especially, our objective is acres. One way or the other. Our objectives are acres of habitat, acres of management of various types, acres. And it is always there in what we're doing, but it's just, it's difficult to get past the volume perspective on that. And if our budget wasn't tied to it, then it would be a heck of a lot easier, right? And you look at the Forest Service, they do what they do, they send the money back to Washington, wherever it goes in all the processes, and they get a budget back. So that makes it easier to do that kind of thing, but for us in our context, it's a little more difficult.
Yeah, and for the folks that are here on SVAC that represent maybe an alternative perspective than the one that I provide on this committee, I really like to better understand, does having a set amount of acres be treated? Like, is acres more important or is volume more important? And if it is volume, I would really like to understand why that's more environmentally impactful than the amount of acres being treated. And if that raises the ire, as you mentioned, I want to understand why, because that doesn't track with me.
I would think that for counties, volumes more associated with money, and counties are big player. I mean,
Well, I just
live
think
in a
counties would be
county.
on the same side of this conversation as I am of keeping those sales in 2024. So for folks that maybe
Yeah, I
would
see what you're saying.
would be opposed
Yeah.
to that and say, well, we should remove those sales. I'd really
Right.
like to understand why. I get it from the state perspective, but the
It's-
other stakeholders.
But we get,
right?
but counties get their money in different ways, right? They get their money from the state and then they get their money in generating jobs,
Mhm.
right? And so I don't know how, well, I don't know, Margaret, how it's all you. I mean, how,
Well, value is most important to counties. Getting the
Yeah.
money is most important, but if I'm failing to really understand what you were saying about the acres creating
More
So-
more value.
Because the situation we find ourselves in is these cruised out higher volume wise. And so we said we were gonna treat, just for round numbers, 100 acres, right? And we thought that that was gonna generate 5 million feet. That's totally not right at all. But you know, and so now, oh, we actually see that's gonna produce 10. Oh, well, that's 5 over where we thought we were gonna be and where we wanna be. So now we're gonna shrink that to only doing 50 acres of
50
treatment.
acres. Uh-huh.
And so to get to that 5. And so instead of saying, well, we really were gonna be treating 100 and we should treat 100, even though the crews cruised out higher, the environmental impact of treating that 100 is still the environmental impact of treating that 100.
From
Volume
an
has
operator
nothing to do
standpoint, you're shipping twice as much wood, you cut the same number or 50% more trees. You may just have one operator versus 2, but they've got twice the work.
And that's the point. I have a lot of members that I'm representing. I don't just represent.
But I want to provide some context here. So on this particular one, we're looking at an overage. We could just as well be looking at an underage where we did not produce the volume.
Yeah.
And under our current regime, we have to raise up a sale. We have to do more acres. And in that instance, by hitting, well, for one, our implementation plan has a volume threshold, not an acreage threshold. And so that's one of the reasons our annual operation plans are pointing back to our implementation plan that has to follow that plan process. And so that's why right now we follow the volume side of it, because we're following our kind of a hierarchy there. But, you have to look at it from what happens if it was the other way next year. So that, yes, this is in potentially the best interest of the county or the best interest of the operators by doing additional sales this year. Where in the next year, it might be that we overrepresented. And if we were, one of the reasons that we are somewhat conservative on it is I think we're very careful with both the counties as well as our own budgets to not overestimate how much value and volumes out there. Because if counties are making budgets on anticipated revenue that comes in and we're $2 million higher than what they get, they're laying off staff. And so, we've been conservative where if instead we were just focused on acreage, we would stop being conservative and we would end up trying to get that number as razor thin as possible. And what would happen is there would be times when people would have to do layoffs potentially yearly.
Yeah. And I'm not saying switch to acres. I'm just trying to give you the current state of affairs.
Sure.
And I don't think anybody's saying that we should go to that. I'm just trying to outline the environmental impact and the fact that, and they're not additional sales. These are primary sales that, we said that we were going to do. And then pulling those back is different than pulling up an alternate sale to meet that. It's a different scenario, right? And so I'm just trying to better understand, given some of the context from the state forester, recognizing we've had 4 mills shut down. We've had loggers already go out of business. Like this is real life. Like this is real people's livelihoods and jobs. We talked a lot about that. We got very somber at the last meeting about this. And so if there's an opportunity for us to continue to do what we said we were going to do, achieve a little more, I don't know why we have to feel bad about it, I guess, when we already know that, things even out, right? We know cruising gives us the right information. That's why we cruise stamps, right? That's why we appraise on cruise volume, not on modeled outputs and modeled volumes. So and then the harvested volume on the scale side at the end of it is gonna be different than what we cruised, and so we're just chasing these, these numbers, these estimated numbers all the time.
I think a big part of it is we're constantly trying to balance, because there's overages and there's underages.
Yeah.
And so when you take the overages and then don't immediately balance it with an underage, you're essentially stealing from your future. And so, there's pros and cons to that. I'm not saying that we shouldn't do things like a departure or something along those lines, but if that is what we're doing, it's eyes wide open. That we're taking from a harvest from a future year to do this year. And I understand what you're saying as far as there was a list of 12 sales or however many per district. That was the primary list, but it was a list that we were saying, we think this is the sale lineup that we need to do in order to achieve this volume. And that's kind of the key there, is that if something changes, if we have a windstorm that occurs and then we have to go out and do salvage sales, we're not going to do some of these. We're going to do this windstorm first, and then we're going to do a different lineup because a change has occurred. And in this particular instance, the change has been a different group storm.
And I guess what I don't understand as well is if we pull back sales that we've already done the work on, which I'm not I'm opposed to, then how does that affect our FY25?
So,
Which we
and
were
so
talking
I'll
about
explain
as
that a little
well.
bit. So they're not really being pulled back. They're just being attributed to a different AOP. So the sales
I
that
would call that pullback.
are in the primaries, those are still on track to be sold in July. In July and August, like as we go forward. So we'll be attributing those, adding those to our FY25 plan, but they're still on the same kind of timeline, just a month or two later. So, if there's a sale in Astoria or a sale in Forest Grove, that doesn't get that's part of that decision process. And it's one we've done for as long as I've been in this role. So they're still part of the lineup and the work is still capitalized on going forward. It's just that you'll see the effects in the next sale plan in quarter four. Some of those primaries will get moved to alternates to make room for the ones that are being done.
Yeah, I guess.
Trajectory just a lag.
Yeah, I get that. I mean, I work for the Forestry.
I know you
I mean, I get that, you guys, and we do less in order to achieve, the acre, again, the impact on the ground is less in the acres treated, right? In the touch on the landscape. Yet, and again, I do really want to hear from the folks in the room and from SVAC who have a different perspective than me. Or a different, place that they're coming from to better understand, because I feel like what happens is we do less now, we pull that into 2025, but we don't get credit for doing less this year. People still are under the assumption that we clear cut or we thin the same amount of acres we said we were going to do in this year's AOP. Then there's no benefit, there's only a negative.
Well, except
my
that you forget that we're looking at volume, so if everybody's reading numbers that are volume, finessed, then they're not really thinking about the general public. They're not really thinking about the acres, they're thinking about the volume, and if we hit our volume close enough, then we're not thinking that there's
The general
changes.
public isn't suing. The people that are suing are the people that care about the impact on the ground. The impact on the ground has to do with how many acres we're treating. So
Well,
for
I
those
don't
people that
know.
care
Is
about that,
Jewel- I guess I don't know, is Jewel suing the state because of acres or because of how
Yes.
much money?
both,
But it really comes down to money, isn't it?
they are
Yes.
they're intertwined.
Right. Money, and I guess it's just been the way they've been doing it, and I'm not, my opinion is I don't have, I hear what you're saying. I
Well, and
absolutely hear.
it's Lisa Phipps and Greg, these are the folks that represent the
Right.
environmental community. I know that you represent the recreation and you have an
I'm a
opinion for sure.
recreation,
So I'm trying to understand, this is hopefully a safe place for people to
Yeah,
feel like they can
no.
be transparent and we can get some of this stuff into the air. So, I've tried to be as transparent as I can be for the folks that I represent and just trying
But
to.
yeah, but I thought what Derek said was pretty clear. It's like giving a defined how much money here's the volume, granted, we don't know how much we're gonna get per million board feet every second of the day because of stocks and whatever. But we know generally so that the state can plan, so that the counties can plan, et cetera, et cetera. And, that's clearer. Isn't that clearer? Maybe it's not, than how many acres. I mean, you can get 1,000,000 board feet off, I'm making up absolute numbers now, 1,000 acres, or you could get 2,000,000 board feet off 1,000 acres. I mean, it's apples and oranges depending on where you are on the
You
landscape.
can hire one logging crew or you can hire two. And I would advocate, because that's who I represent,
Two
that I
would
think
be
two
better.
would be better than one.
Right,
But maybe you're reflecting just the reality from your perspective
Right.
that it's not, for your community, it's not a zero cost
Right.
decision to
Yes.
delay a sale, even though there's a sustained even flow of volume.
Yes.
In your community, it's not sustained even flow. It's development, so that's perfectly clear and
Yeah.
reasonable to share.
Which is one of the reasons why we have a sustained even flow model. We lost our tail during the Great Recession, logging stuff. I mean, it was primarily due to keep the operator pool and the mill pool working.
So I think Amanda can, I can sympathize with your
Yeah.
point and I can relate to it. It may not translate immediately into,
Mhm.
but that's the most efficient way to run the entire program, but we should all be cognizant of the fact it's not zero cost to this community.
Yeah.
Is
Well,
that-
and just,
that-
and just from the planning perspective and the planning that I've done, you know, pulling it into 2025. I don't necessarily have the same opinion that, if we kept it in 2024, we'd be quote unquote stealing from 25. Because we didn't anticipate that being there to begin with. Therefore, we weren't planning on that being there. Therefore, I don't feel like we're stealing that from anywhere. It's just more that we found, right? Or more that was there than we thought was there.
So this would be an interesting discussion as we go into scenario stuff
Yeah.
forward. And also performance measurements, really what they want to set. So, because people talk about a rotation age, well, that is a really easy one to figure out. Take your available acres and just do some simple math. You harvest 1% of your available acres per year, you're gonna have 100-year rotation. Right?
right. Okay.
And so that's, right, so that's simple, and that's the kind of thing that we can plan around. But that's not a place where we've ever been yet, and so I think we need to give ourselves some time to work through this, and I think it's a good thing to build into that conversation. And that might be something that comes out of this group, because I think acres affects, with the exception of the revenue piece,
I don't know.
to, the direct revenues, I think, and how it balances with costs and all the other things, but I think it really affects more folks in this room than the volume does, because from a recreation standpoint, what is the footprint of management on the landscape? From the environmental standpoint, the same thing. And how many loggers you need to employ to get that work done?
But the mill folks and the county revenue interests would
Right.
see it that same way.
It's not it's not a this or that. It's like anything in natural resources, right?
Right, But it
It's all
could,
complex.
but like Mike said, it could be an element of the performance measure. Because we do care about who's working on our landscapes and whether we can keep, how can we help make that still provide a strong workforce through time? I mean, that should be a performance measure, I think, but I don't know how.
In the past, we used to have acreage targets. That was part of it. We have volume targets and acreage targets. What really skews those is when we have an event of some kind. We have a windstorm event. It's like, well, now we're 10 times over our acreage target for the year. So does that mean we don't harvest for 10 years?
Right.
And so that's when we started dropping those. Is we said this doesn't apply anymore because we're running into scenarios where we can't achieve both all the time. And so we had to choose one, and we went with the volume at the time. And there's reasons for both. but as has been insinuated, the primary reason for the volume is it's so closely tied to the value. And which was how we do all of the rest of our business.
And I think a lot of the background on the balancing on volume is, when we model, it's a sustainable even flow of volume. Here's what our sustainable harvest calculation is. And up until just recently, it's been a huge point of contention with the environmental comments that we would receive about over harvesting based on our calculations and based on what was out there and available. And so using a volume target has been our targets, and balancing that is to balance both sides. Whether that's where we need to be in this current scenario, those are decisions that the department will make. But that's kind of the historical context of the pressures that we're getting from both sides.
Yeah, and I use moral of the story is I'm just asking that sell the sales you said you were gonna sell.
Happy to. But I do think even beyond that it is a good question for us to think about as we develop the framework for the future. We've learned a lot of lessons along the way. We know a lot more than we did when we got rid of those acreage targets in the past. We've talked about just having acreage targets in the HCAs because volume is sort of relative in those areas. Because of their habitat goals. And so yes, I understand for the FY24 it's important, but also I think in future conversations, thinking about it through that context, we may have lost kind of like the operators and the planning along the way if the jobs really are, they are tied to acres. So I think it's valid points.
And it ties back into Tyson's comment around the component metric decisions.
Socially, obviously, we're connected to acres also. We're coming at this faster.
So we have 20 minutes.
Okay.
So
Are you,
Yeah, I'll
you
just
good?
really quick. We're going to be moving quick on the IP revisions. Really looking at the scale and changes. Hopefully finishing in the next month. Doing the actual docu development over the summer and early fall, and then hopefully we're going to public comment in the fall of 24 because we don't want to do what we did last time, which was 2 public comment periods back to back with the AOP and the IP. So we're really hoping to finish by December of 24. So that's it.
Well done. Yeah, so now we're at the point where we just need to talk about the road ahead, for the fall meeting. I believe the date's October 25th.
Yep, sure.
And, what do we want to key up for the agenda, given that some time's going to elapse. So obviously the performance measures are something we're going to track internally and try and, queue that up in an informed way as it, aligns with the meeting schedule there. And if there's any correspondence along the way or updates, I encourage you all to, if you have the time, I know everybody's busy, etc. Appreciate all the time you invest in this committee. It's a big commitment and value that. But if you have the opportunity to watch any of the board meetings along the way or online, that would help probably put context around, the ongoing development of the measures. So, which could inform how you all think and feel about them. So if you have the ability to do that, that'd probably be helpful. And then Colleen will obviously be working on, the implementation plan revision. So that'll be at a place where on October 25th, depending on the length of the public comment period she chooses, may or may not be getting really close to being up public comment.
Should be.
Yeah, so might be framing up, here's what they are, they're open for public comment now, and clarifying what's in them, etc.
Ron, can you give us an update on who may or who may not be on the Oregon Board of Forestry, or what the procedure is?
I can tell you who's not on the board of forestry temporarily. That's Chandra Ferrari, because she's on assignment with the governor's office. So
She's not resigned her position.
that's not my, I don't know. I haven't, I'm not, you have to ask Mike more about that than me, but she's
Hold up to the big leagues.
yeah, she's been
But
called
she's
up.
on OPB, she's still gonna retain her seat on the board.
She's just not. She wasn't at the class. She wasn't at.
So anyways, you probably know as much as I do. Yeah.
And if you read the OPB article.
I read it, I don't know anymore.
Well, just about others that are maybe looking at coming off.
Yeah, but that's outside of our lane here. I mean, no,
Okay,
it's
that's
interesting, but it's not really, I don't know. What else is on people's minds though?
Yeah, is anything else on people's minds? And if not, because my brain is a little fried after that, long conversation. I mean, Denise and I and Dawn probably will talk way before October. And if I can solicit, or Denise can solicit you all for other inputs. And so I'm gonna give you some time to think about those. But let's try to do that the next month, so that if we have to queue someone up, they'll have some time to do that. Does that sound okay? Right.
Now, one thing I might add, not that I'm trying to add things to the agenda.
No,
We already have
No,
a
no,
lot of
if you
stuff
can
going
add
on.
something, that's great.
But given some of this conversation, ODF is, I believe, gonna be participating in a pretty comprehensive forestry workforce study that we helped to get passed this past legislative session.
Yeah.
And so, the steering committee is coming together on that. It's a steering committee through the Workforce and Talent Development Board on the Higher Education Coordinating Commission. So, I don't know what type of update we will have in October, but there will probably be some sort of update.
Okay,
We'll hopefully by then have had at least a few meetings to start drafting and thinking about the request for proposal for the study.
Okay.
And that'll include not just operators, it's gonna be quantifying state, public, private, industrial, non-industrial, nonprofit,
Mhm.
all of the different arms, watershed council, soil and water conservation districts, all the arms of how things get done in the woods and achieved, so. Anyways, it might be interesting for this group to kind of know what's happening. in that
Yes.
space.
And is there, because we talked
People
brief,
online too.
oh, yeah. Thanks. Lisa, you still there? And I don't think Cheryl is.
I am,
In the chat.
Oh, Cheryl, are you still there?
this is Lisa.
Okay, do you have any, do you have anything off the top? Okay,
I don't think so. There's a couple things that I may, if it's all right, send a little bit later. There's been a few things brewing that might have some value for this group to hear about,
okay,
just not
Great.
quite ripe yet.
thank you. And I see Cheryl's note also.
Developing some standard operating procedures for responding to public comments.
Yeah.
or propose, how we.
Yeah.
approach, yeah.
Okay.
That's great.
And maybe, do you want me to go back to the OSU, to Dan, and talk to him a little bit about? I mean, that's OSU,
Extension.
yeah, driven to this
Yeah.
question.
Yeah.
He's on our,
Yeah.
he's on our committee, and he offered his not his services, but OSU services. And Cheryl's asking about those things right now. Maybe OSU can help us think about those, or if you think about it, or something.
He advocated for helping do tours.
Tours,
Mhm.
okay. Or workshops or whatever, right?
And I don't know if those are.
But their education, I mean, he's extension, you know,
Community education.
yeah, adjacent, just more generalized. I guess in my mind, I think, since we're moving to the, sometime soon, 3 to 5 years, let's say, new FMP and this new HCP, then that would be a great place for extension to teach people what the hell that means, right? Because that is complicated.
Mhm.
And sort of the trade-offs
Yes.
that's gonna, the immediate trade-offs to that, relative to workforce, relative to economics, relative to all those things, because those are big, big issues.
I think that's it.
All right, that sounds like the merit.
Yeah, you can't adjourn because it's
Yeah.
not you, so you probably be your last meeting.
That's right.
So.
Yes.
Yes.
You can be a contractor, maybe stay on as the contractor for the park. Anyway, so, I was gonna, suggest, are there ways we can, a convener the department can get, some energy back in the attendance participation scheme here. Socially, things have changed over the years and all the nonprofits I'm involved with and volunteers. It's harder to get people in rooms together, so I don't suggest we could solve this larger social problem, but I'm just bummed to miss the company of the partners I come to like working with in the room, and so I hope we can find ways to get a band. Something.
What, am I not enough for you?
Yeah. So,
I agree, Barry. It's not just with this committee, it's in all aspects of our work.
Yeah.
It's a new societal challenge, just in maintaining that sense of connection, building relationships in a technologically advanced workforce situation. So to speak, if that's true or not. All right.
So does that mean that you're hosting the next meeting then?
Come, yeah, yeah.
Lisa, one other thing, and I don't know, Colleen, how you feel about this, but AOL and ODF collaborated on a project cost survey to try to better understand, what the state of affairs of kind of like the overhead costs and costs of doing project work on state lands and kind of abroad, like broader than that too. But we should at that
I think
point
so.
very
Yeah.
well
Yeah.
know the results of that. We've
Yeah.
already had about 80 people fill out the survey, 80 operators fill out the
Great.
survey, so maybe we can tie that into some of the other workforce topics.
I think it would be great.
Great.
Just as a. Yeah.
Well, thank you all for your time.
I want to thank you for being there for us and over the last many years. And we will miss you, but we know that you will have more fun than.
Thank you. I appreciate that. You guys will all do great. Just I encourage you to maintain, your sense of agency as you face the challenges ahead. You're all very strong and resilient and, support each other. I'm sure you can solve any obstacles that come your way, but I do think that sense of agency is critical, as you go forward and to support each other and inspire each other, and you'll all do well. So thank you.
Great, thank you, Ron.
Thank you.
Okay, so. They enjoy the band. Drive up.